time. Welcome to everybody. My name is Manisha Gutman, and I work with a group called eCoexist, which is based here in Pune in India. It started out as a social enterprise, and we also now have a not-for-profit called the eCoexist Foundation, which is hosting this Revive series. This series started a few months ago during the lockdown in a very informal way with friends wanting to share their work, wanting to discuss and explore whether it was possible to have a new paradigm post-COVID and after the lockdown. And there have been some very interesting discussions that have been happening. We do have a webpage on which you can take a look at all the previous discussions. Currently, eCoexist is focused on two main subjects. One is that we run a study forum called eCoexist Consciousness, which is looking at the links between our inner environment and the external environmental crisis that we find ourselves in. And this is a collection of about 140 professionals that are looking at how we really are responsible for creating the environment we live in. We also are working on a new program called Healing with Nature. This is something we started 2 years ago, which now has become extremely relevant as people are trying to understand health and also looking for a reconnection with nature. So under Healing with Nature, we're going to look at plant-based medicines, animal therapy, and several other subjects, spending time in the outdoors, etc. So that's a very exciting thing that's coming up. The way we structure these talks is that we have about an hour, which is given to the speaker. And during this time, the speaker will walk us through their subject. After that, we have about 15 minutes with the panel. And then after that panel discussion, we open up to the audience for you to directly interact with the speaker. So today we have someone who's a dear friend and has been for some years now, Dr. Charles McNeill. He has been working with the United Nations for 25 years now on subjects of forest biodiversity, ecosystems, and climate change, sustainable energy, and also public and private partnerships. His focus has been on Indigenous people and local communities. And I was delighted to actually meet him and Dr. Barrow when I was working with the Kalpavriksha Environment Group in an IUCN task force on Indigenous and local communities and protected areas. So that's how I got to know them. Dr. McNeill has been the founder of several successful global initiatives. Some of you may have heard of the Equator Initiative. He was also centrally involved in the Paris Agreement of 2015. And most recently, he has founded the Interfaith Initiative for Rainforest, which is what he's going to share with us today. Welcome, Charles. I'm so glad that you're here.
Thank you. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Where I am here in British Columbia, it's 9 o'clock in the evening, and it's a great honor to speak with all of you.
I'll just introduce the panelists, Charles, before we start with you.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah. So we have
bird song, please.
Yeah, we have with us Neema Pathak from the Kalpavriksha Environment Action Group, again a Pune-based group that I have had the good fortune to have worked with and have learned a lot from them. Neema's focus area of work has been on community conservation. She put together a massive directory of community conserved areas in India. She has been promoting the cause of community conservation globally for several years now. She has also recently got very interested in Buddhism, and this is why I felt that it would be great to have her here with us today. Welcome, Neema.
Thank you so much, Manisha. I'm so excited about this talk, and thank you so much for inviting me here today.
We have with us Meera Bendur from Bangalore. who is just about to move to Jaipur now. And I recently got to know Meera when I heard her speak. She is the author of a book called Nature in Indian Philosophy and Cultural Traditions. Meera is part of a very interesting initiative called Barefoot Philosophers, and I'm hoping that she'll tell us a little more about that. She also, again, has her own spiritual path. She is an established yoga teacher. And besides that, she's been working closely with the World Council of Churches and is part of an interfaith initiative in India that looks at gender and environment. So I'm really hoping that we hear a little more about this and that, you know, we can look at how the interfaith movement in India is shaping up, considering that we have so many different religious groups here. Welcome, Meera.
Thank you. Hello, good morning, good evening, and good night to not in the good night way, but have a nice day to everyone here. And I'm looking forward to joining this informal group of people who are working for the environment, because I've been an activist in Bangalore for a long time, hugging trees and fighting, fighting for forests and also for indigenous people. So I'm also very wonderfully delighted to meet people who are healers in nature, because usually in academics there is this whole divide between these rational thinkers who are really, who consider things like this as superstition and kind of look down on it. So I've been working with people on praying in nature and also eco-psychology, particularly when it comes to nature and natural healing. So it's wonderful meeting all of you here. And I hope that I'll be part of many more conversations from now on. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. And lastly, we have another dear friend from Kenya, Dr. Edmund Barrow. Ed has already spoken on Revive, so I'm so glad that he's here, because now we're starting to connect the various subjects that we're looking at on Revive. Ed is based in Nairobi, Kenya, and it's early morning there. So I'm so thankful to you that you got here for this, Ed. He is a consultant on community conservation and governance and works closely also with the government in Kenya. He's also the author of a book called Our Future in Nature, which he shared with us in one of the earlier Revive talks, which he's done a deep study on the notion of the sacred as it is associated with trees. So sacred groves and trees that are considered sacred. So again, so glad to have him. And I think this whole group is, there's going to be a very rich and deep conversation. So with that, shall we hand it over to you, Charles? You have about an hour and we're all here. And if it's okay with you, we might intervene while you speak, or if you'd rather prefer, we can stop and just put on all the questions later, whatever you're comfortable with.
I'm comfortable with either of those options. So if you feel inspired, feel free to jump in. I don't have an hour of material to talk about. I mean, I could, but that wasn't what I was thinking. I was thinking we would have a discussion, but I could set up the discussion and say a little bit about how we created this thing, why we created this thing, where this is going. And the thing I'm talking about is the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative. What it is in a sentence is an international multi-faith alliance that's bringing moral urgency and faith-based leadership to local and global efforts to end tropical deforestation. And I must say that after 25 years in the UN, it's even more than that, I'm losing count, I never thought my career would take this turn. I didn't grow up with any religious background. My father was the son of a Scottish minister who imbued him with so much religion, he decided to make sure his children had no religion. So I grew up with no formal religion. So it's really quite a change of pace to be spending all my time with religious leaders of all kinds. And it's actually a pleasure and a delight, as I'll explain. And my story begins with something that's well known to all of you, surely, the climate crisis simply has to be dealt with and urgently and now. The biodiversity crisis is of enormous consequence as well. And I would argue that there's an underappreciated, worked on dimension to these two crises that deserves a lot more focus, and that is the focus on forests and tropical forests in particular. All forests are important, but we've decided to focus on tropical forests, even rainforests in this first phase, I'll explain. And tropical forests are generally defined as those forests between 28 degrees latitude plus and minus of the equator. The rainforests are a more narrow band right there, but a large proportion of the world's forests live there. And I wanted to just say a few words about why they're so important. And before that, just to acknowledge that over the past 15 years, since 2005, when tropical deforestation was first formally considered by the UN climate conference, the UNFCCC, the first time we've really considered that was in 2005, and that's when a number of us, and certainly a lot of you involved, would have really started to work in earnest. Mona, I think let's not put up anything right now. Let's just go back and let people see each other for now. I think later on I may step you through the website, but right now I'll just give some introductory comments first. So I think the world community has really been working hard for the past 15 years on this tropical forest agenda, and we really haven't turned the corner. There's been something really missing. And what I would argue is missing is the faith communities. And before going into that a little further, I want to say that probably what's well known to you, that tropical forests are special in the sense that something like 80% of terrestrial species live in these forests. They regulate the global climate. They provide food, water, jobs for billions of people. When they're cut down, we lose tens of millions of evolution. When I'm in the Amazon, I'm reminded that that's 56 million years of evolution has led to what we see, the diversity of life in those forests. In certain other forests, it's even longer. Also, the destruction of forests is leading to animal-human interactions that's causing real mischief in a serious way, causing conditions that can lead to the emergence of new diseases, like the basis for the pandemics like we're seeing today. The extinction, so in addition to driving millions of species, plants and animals to extinction, undermining the lives and livelihoods of indigenous peoples, and contributing to global health crises, tropical deforestation is truly a disaster for global climate. And it's particularly regrettable because if protected, these same forests could provide up to a third of the solution to averting catastrophic climate change. So it's a double tragedy. And then of course, there's the rainfall. Forests generate rainfall that goes across entire continents, ensuring the productivity of the world's agricultural systems, both locally and then sometimes a continent away. And if tropical forests were a country, its annual contribution to climate change would be the third highest in the world, behind the US and China. So in a nutshell, it just simply can't meet the Paris climate goals without decisive action on tropical forests. And so over these past 15 years, we haven't turned the tide. We've realized something needs. We also realize that tropical deforestation, dealing with that and climate change, comes down to political will, that to motivate governments to implement the kind of laws and regulations, enforcement and finance needed to stop deforestation will require an absolute sea change in public opinion and activism. And we considered that we need to inspire people in new ways that goes beyond kind of the rational, the logic, the scientific. We need to reach them at a deeper level of values and ethics. And to that end, we noticed that one key component of civil society has been missing from the equation. The religious community has not been very active in climate or forests, or for that matter. And yet, an estimated 84% of all human beings associate themselves formally or informally with one religion or another. We also noticed 3 years ago that certain individual religions were starting to stand up and be heard on the climate issue. Pope Francis came out with the Laudato Si on care for our common home in 5 years ago. Muslim clerics in Indonesia, we noticed, were starting to create fatwas. These are legal opinions or decrees handed down by Islamic leaders against illegal logging and illegal use of land. Buddhists in Southeast Asia were getting involved in protecting trees. Hindus in India and elsewhere were protecting rivers and forests. So we started to see this individual popping up of engagement. And since generating political will is so critical to protecting forests and climate, we wondered, what could the world look like if these people got involved in a serious way? What could become possible if all the religions came together to take a collective position and collective action on protecting forests beyond the individual stands some religions are taking? What government could possibly withstand or resist the power of a collective religious voice on behalf of forests and climate indigenous peoples? That was our thinking, our hypothesis. And so, as I said, we understood that science and logic and rationality was not proving to be sufficient to motivate action. We suspected that it would now be essential to make the moral case, the ethical case, even the spiritual case for protecting forests. So 3 years ago, almost exactly 3 years ago, we, the UN, supported by the government of Norway, convened a meeting in Oslo. And we brought about 100 religious leaders and indigenous leaders, mainly from the tropical forested regions of Africa, Asia, Latin America, for a 3-day dialogue. And it was kicked off under the auspices of the King of Norway. Why not? And so that was a good beginning. And we conducted for the religious leaders focused training information sessions on the science of forests and climate and the facts around indigenous peoples' rights and land management. We facilitated a dialogue among the faiths on how and where nature, forests, climate, biodiversity, and environment figures into their theology, into their scriptures, into their principles, into their practices. It was quite exciting to see this dialogue. We found out that these issues actually feature fairly clearly and strongly in all the faith's traditions and values and principles, each in their own way. And rainforests in particular caught their attention, these iconic, exuberant, remarkably rich repositories of the abundance and diversity of life. All faiths seem to acknowledge that mankind does not have the right to destroy God's creation. Believe it or not, even the evangelicals in Brazil, the ones who put Bolsonaro into power, are the most clear on this point, that we do not have the right to destroy God's creation. And this is how we're beginning to effectively appeal to them and work with them. The religious leaders in Oslo responded very strongly to this call. It was very surprising to me. They seemed to understand that the protection of forests as being in their wheelhouse, in their own areas of focus, that it's a sanctity of life issue, it's a human rights issue, it's an environmental justice issue, and they resonated very quickly, very strongly. And perhaps the most powerful and poignant moment of the 3-day meeting was after the indigenous peoples had spoken for a long time about their cultures and ways of life and commitments and connections to the forest. The religious leaders, one by one, stood up and acknowledged that the indigenous peoples have been providing an incalculably valuable service for mankind and for all living things by protecting the forests, often at great cost to themselves and their communities, from the persecution, the oppression, the suppression of their customs, their culture, their language, their ways of life. these religious leaders acknowledged that they themselves were the cause of much of this suffering over the past 500 years, and they began to apologize for that. It was a moment that was stunning and just very moving for everyone involved. Individually and collectively, these religious leaders acknowledged that they have moral authority, they have political power, they have economic power, and they can now use these assets on behalf of Indigenous peoples instead of against them. And that was a turning point. For me, it was like, you could have, of course, heard a pin drop when this was going on, like people were transfixed. But for me, I knew this was a turning point. Something had changed in the world. Certainly for me, I knew my life was going to be different for the next little while as this initiative took off. And that was really the beginning of the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative. And the next day, we all agreed to move forward to create a movement. And we called it, for want of a better term, the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative, IRI. It's not the most catchy term. It's a little bit complicated. It doesn't translate perfectly in all the different languages, but it's what we kind of came up with.
It reminds me of the IRS sometimes, actually. I have to say, no, it's IRI. Right.
That's right, not the IRS. And we agreed to start small. I mean, I say that tongue in cheek because the 5 countries out of the 195 UN members, only 5 out of 195, but these are big ones. Brazil, Colombia, Peru, that's in the Amazon, and then Indonesia in Asia, and then the Democratic Republic of Congo in Africa, just 5 countries. But believe it or not, these 5 countries, when you calculate where there is residual remaining rainforests, 70% of the world's remaining rainforest exists in these 5 countries. So although I say this was a small number, it's a huge task, and we do hope to expand this initiative beyond.
You chose the countries, sorry Charles, you chose the countries because they have the most rainforests remaining there. Okay.
That was it. And of the 100 religious leaders, Indigenous leaders, they were from those regions, and they knew they were priorities. They knew they could make progress if they put their minds to it. So we are looking at how to make this program available to other countries. So we then went to these countries, did initial visits, met with the most senior religious leaders in all the faiths, met with the Indigenous leaders in each country, met with the NGOs, the activists, the scientists, even the political leaders who were working on the forest issue. And we, assessed their interest. And in each of those 5 countries, there was enormous interest to go forward. So we then, a few months later, undertook 3-day events for between 100 and 400 people, following the same format that we did originally in Oslo. And that is that we had educational sessions on the science of forests and climate, Indigenous peoples' issues. We had an interfaith dialogue on the relevance of forests to their faiths. We had an exchange, an organized exchange between the religious leaders with those actors in the forest issue, those leaders from science and NGOs and government and Indigenous peoples who are working on these issues to basically come to some understanding of what could be the priorities, what difference could be made if religious leaders got into the mix. We also then did a public event, a lot of media and attention to put down a marker that this is now happening in this country. And then we created an advisory council with those leaders of religious leaders in particular, Indigenous leaders strongly, a few NGOs, a few scientists, and these councils, high-level, powerful councils, were then facilitated by a facilitator who is now organizing these. So that's the body of work. And our work is in 3 areas. It's in education and outreach. First of all, it's in on-the-ground mobilization, and third, in political advocacy. And for education, we've worked with leading experts to produce an entire library of materials to equip religious leaders with the science and the resources they need to be effective advocates. On our website, interfaithrainforest.org, we have a resources link, and all of these resources that I'm mentioning are available there in 5 different languages: English, French, Spanish, Bahasa, and Portuguese. Here's the resources link, the country fact sheets that we have particular studies on each of these 5 countries showing what's driving deforestation, what's needed to avoid it and prevent it, and so on. We've got these issue primers. We have most recently launched a resource guide on rainforest protection for religious communities with the latest science and spiritual reflections from 10 major faiths and practical guidance on how religious leaders can get involved. And with regard to the country fact sheets, as I mentioned, they tell the story of the deforestation drivers and solutions. The primers have key facts on forest climate change and the rights of indigenous peoples, and the faith toolkits for Catholic, evangelical, Protestant, Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, Hindu, and Baha'i faiths, with sample prayers and religious lesson plans and other spiritual resources. The religious leaders in these countries have told us that if they have the facts, they can tell the story. So
I see the main world religions here. Is there also a whole section on the indigenous belief systems or indigenous and worldviews?
We have the sections on indigenous rights, indigenous issues, more in the political sense, but not on the indigenous spirituality. That it hasn't been a request yet to actually document in that way. And often spirituality is not written up in a form that can be conveyed in this way. But so no, in terms of religious, in the spirituality of indigenous peoples, we have not yet done kind of a study to document that. That's something we'll look at if indigenous peoples who are guiding our program do ask for that. At this point, the intention is really to aim at those sort of traditional religions, to mobilize, activate them in support of the indigenous people's rights and in support of their spirituality, in support of their work, but so far we haven't been able to document all of that. Regarding on-the-ground mobilization, actually, we'll go back to that if you would. I just wanted to mention the partners that at the bottom there. The partners, if you can just blow that up a little bit. The interfaith partners that helped us launch this initiative and are driving it in the countries. There's one that we hear that Mira is working with the World Council of Churches, and Green Faith, the Parliament of the World's Religions, Religions for Peace, and the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. Those are the 5 interfaith partners. And then there's the government of Norway, that's the Norway's International Climate and Forest Initiative, NICFI, along with Rainforest Foundation Norway, which is also on there. And then UN Environment Program, the organization I'm with now. I was with UNDP for 25 years, and now more recently, last couple of years with the UN Environment Program. So these are the partners who are driving this forward. So that's a little bit about the kind of educational materials. Regarding on-the-ground mobilization, and maybe in terms of the website, why don't we go back to the homepage and then just let you know. We can just scroll down quickly. Jane Goodall has been supportive of our work. Let's keep going down. We work in these various ways, which I'll say more about in a moment. Let's go down a little further. Pope Francis has been active, obviously, and they're the partners. So there's a lot on the website, but why don't we turn off the website right now and go back to the visual. And with regarding on-the-ground mobilization, over the past 1.5 to 2 years, the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative has been active in these 5 countries. And in IRI, in Colombia and Peru, in particular, those were the first countries out of the gate. And they're really showing what's possible when religious leaders mobilize to cause policy change. And in IRI Colombia was able to get a commitment to ending tropical deforestation into countries' national development plans. And now they have 25 local chapters all across the country that are actively engaged with local land use councils to advocate for protecting forests in the very regions with the highest deforestation rate. So what we saw early on was it was not enough to effectuate change and action at the national level, that we needed to work at the subnational and the very local area. Oftentimes the decisions made by national governments don't translate into action or the right kind of action at the local level. So we've then taken this methodology to the local level, convening again the religious leaders, the indigenous leaders, the NGOs, the scientists in these local provinces and districts to galvanize action. IRI Peru has held political advocacy events with candidates for Congress and then secured their commitment to protect forests before they got elected. And then when they were elected, they went back to them and said, okay, now you need to act. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, IRI is supporting landmark legislation to recognize the rights of indigenous peoples and forest communities. First time this has happened, and now religious leaders are getting involved in supporting it. They have tremendous political influence in that country. Indonesia is more recently getting involved, but they're with a Muslim majority, but with Christian provinces that are where there is remaining forests and forests under threat, that the Muslim-Christian collaboration is very important, and it's starting to get moving there. The bottom line is that in these 5 countries, the programs are building powerful movements that we hope and intend will be capable of bringing about change. At the same time, globally, we're mobilizing religious leaders to take action. And just almost exactly a year ago, about 1,000 of the world's most senior religious leaders, representing over 1 billion people, were convened by Religions for Peace, and together they adopted the Face for Forest Declaration, stating in the strongest possible terms that taking action to halt and reverse tropical deforestation is a spiritual responsibility that they will devote themselves to. So at the global level, we're getting attention and commitment. On World Environment Day in June, the interfaith group of a very powerful group of religions issued a powerful statement encouraging religious leaders everywhere to take these educational materials that we showed you and push them through their various channels. So that's the nature of the work. It's in a way it's just starting, but it's also well underway. And maybe I'll stop there for a moment. We have other things to talk about, but let's. I know that the distinguished panel, is been working on these issues probably a lot longer than I have, and so I'm eager to hear from them and the rest of the participants. And we can come back later if we want to talk about what's the status of tropical forests, what's causing it, what's it going to take to stop it, and so on. But let's maybe stop there and see where we want to take this conversation.
Charles, so before we get the panel to ask you, I mean, that's a lot. Thank you for summarizing so much work in such a short time. May I ask you to also share a little bit about yourself, your own journey? When this opportunity came up, you said it was very different from everything you'd done before, and what kind of inspired you to do this, so we get to know you a little better also.
Yes, well, as I mentioned, I've been with the UN for these past 25 or 6 or 7 or 8 years. I'm losing count, but my commitment since a young age, since a child actually, I'm now in British Columbia at this time for these past few months, and this is where as a child I first discovered nature and learned to love snakes and a species, an animal group that most people are not very friendly with. I love nature and realized that there was nature was, I had a special connection to nature that I wanted to do something with. And then my whole life and career has been about that. But also in terms of, I mentioned that I haven't had any formal religious background, but I have had a powerful spiritual dimension in my life, and have been meditating for decades every day, and have discovered that by connecting to my inner self, that my action becomes more focused, more effective, my authenticity is elevated, that I'm clear about what I'm doing and why, that also I think my connection to nature, realizing that in nature, I connect to a kind of a spirituality, and through my spirituality, I'm more open to the power and magic of nature and the divinity of nature. So I have this personal connection that's been evolving. And so when I had the opportunity to devote a couple of years of my life to sharing with religious leaders this connection to nature, and not just the science, but the personal, that I thought, well, let's go for it. That it was a very dramatic career shift away from the sort of the science, the policy, the advocacy, a whole different, but it did occur to me, as I mentioned earlier, that we're not getting it done with the players on the field. And if we don't engage these very powerful leaders and actors, that we're probably not gonna achieve the future that we all need and want. So it's been an interesting course of my life, of early connection to nature, later connection to kind of spirituality, and then those two coming together in the professional domain. So it's an interesting and surprising journey, but I'm delighted to give it a try. Is that the kind of thing you were looking for, Manish?
But I want to say, Charles, you wouldn't consider yourself a particularly religious person, would you?
No, far from it. As I said, my father had so much religion. He said his kids are going to get no religion. So I'd say that I'm an empty cup. But I would say too that the kind of the spirituality that I connect with through my meditation and so on does enable me, I feel, to connect with religious leaders. I think at the core of all religions is a spirituality, whether it's expressed and whether it lives on or not is another question. But I'd say that also that that spirituality that's at the core of each religion is also why the scriptures, the theologies of each religion honors, respects, recognizes the divinity of nature and the importance of nature. And so I think that's where that comes from. Also, I'd say that my sort of connection with that spiritual side allows me to connect with religious leaders of all faiths. And I think that I'm, that I can traffic, I can be with them in a way that they feel understood and gotten. So even though I don't have a religious background, I think that spirituality allows me to communicate and be with religious leaders of all kinds. At least that's what my current thinking is.
Because what we see here in India, of course, India has so many religions. We're probably one of those countries where, every path to God is acceptable and respected. And so we see such a diversity of religious beliefs here. But what we also observe is that religious identity kind of also disconnects people from each other as they get attached to their own identity. Whereas, so would you say that maybe shifting the focus to nature and the fact that every community depends on nature eventually would be able to break through those religious barriers and get people to talk to each other? Because
Yes. I'm so glad you raised that point, because now that I think back, when I visited these countries and I would meet with these religious leaders of all kinds, what was amazing to me was the thing they could share and have no difference on was this issue of nature, environment, even climate, even forest. That's something they could all agree on. And in the Amazon, there's quite a bit of tension between, even in the Christian faith, between the Catholics, the evangelicals. But the one thing they don't argue about is this. So it's a fascinating truth that by bringing this opportunity, and the UN is well respected in these countries, so it was an easy entree. I can go there and convene and meet with almost anybody, and yet that issue of environment and nature and forests is something they can all agree upon, and that gets them together around the same table. So even if they have differences of opinion or strong even problems, even discord, on this issue, they can agree. And so the interfaith, and the interfaith umbrella is a powerful one because it and the forest agenda gives them something they can agree on or work on together. But it's a really important point that you made. I'm glad you made that.
The other thing that occurred to me was that, you are like through the faith sheets, you are helping these religious groups and leaders to contextualize conservation within their own theology, like you said. And what I've understood about religious belief is that it's constantly being interpreted and reinterpreted, and it should be reinterpreted with the times, but not all faiths are equally open to that reinterpretation, is what I've seen in India when we are talking to different groups. So do you have anything to say about that? Like taking a look again at scripture and representing the same teaching in light of conservation. So how does that work?
Yeah. I don't have a lot to say about that because I haven't really been diving in with each of these faiths into their scriptures and theologies. It's really what's happened in each country is that they've agreed, these leaders, to get together, like even right now this week, there are 6 formal religions in Indonesia. Actually 8 groups because there are 3 Muslim groups, but 6 major religions. And for them to get on board and take this forward, they said that they needed to take that material that we produced with kind of the best science and working with indigenous peoples. They've taken that material that we produced and then they've made it their own. They got together with their various groups and studied their own scriptures. They've kind of ground truthed it. They've connected it, and then they've come up with their own kind of conclusion about what their stand on these issues based on our scientific. So I'm not an expert on the theologies of any of these religions. I leave it to them in each country to do what they want to do with that. What I'm seeing, as I mentioned, is that in each case, they're having no trouble finding the right case to make for why protecting the forest, protecting the climate, protecting the biodiversity is important, why it's consistent with their particular faith. But I've had seen no issues so far with that they've all gone about their work and now they're tapping into the various communication channels. It's truly astounding to see the power of these channels in some of these countries, like in Democratic Republic of Congo. I was there some months ago. That a lot of the education of the entire country is managed by the Christian, by the Catholics and the evangelicals. The health system is dependent on them. And in Indonesia, similarly, the Muslim leaders have tremendous access to most of the people in the country, and they're now ready to use those communication channels to disseminate these messages and this information.
Because Charles, the thing that also occurs to me is that when you what you're trying to do is also going to kind of question the power structure and shake it up a little bit, and especially where when you contrast the amount of power that mainstream religions have versus indigenous groups and local communities. And so when you're saying, and what you shared about how the religious leaders apologize to the indigenous communities, I'm just trying to think, whether we would ever reach such a point in India because it's really saying, okay, you've got to recognize where the true power lies, and for the future generations, that lies in your connection to nature. So you're redefining that, and you're questioning the current power structure. So how? I mean, that's a tough one, right?
Yes, and this issue of, like you sort of alluded to, often religious and spiritual leaders do not want to get entangled in politics or take a public stand, and we're seeing though that in some cases, religious leaders are willing to rock the boat and swing out. Pope Francis has been very progressive, very bold, encountering tremendous internal resistance and discord, and we're seeing in some countries a similar kind of willingness to step out, and others are not. So this is an issue we're dealing with. In some cases, the advisory council in these countries is able to take a position, a hard-edged position on issues. Often they're not, because they can't reach consensus. In that case, sometimes some of the members will break off and be able to be more progressive and take a harder position. That's unfortunate in a sense, because it's the collective voice that's most powerful, but they can't always reach agreement on this. And then the other thing is that you think and be correct in assuming that stopping deforestation in these countries and transforming into kind of a new green economy is a radical proposition, and it is likely to kick up vested interests in the private sector, the extractive industries that are wreaking tremendous harm, the oil mining, poaching, and so on. Oil are all special interests, and in the government in many cases are implicated in corruption and so on. So you could be right that this can be considered a very controversial issue. But what I'm also seeing is that the religious leaders are able sometimes to transform an issue that could be seen to be political into something that is just common sense and in everyone's interest. It's very interesting to see that when they take a stand, they don't necessarily take it opposed to anything, but just in favor of things. So one way I'm seeing them navigate political rough waters is by not highlighting the political nature of it, but by talking about the divinity of nature, the rights of nature, the importance of protecting environmental services and so on. But it's true, some faiths, some religious leaders are willing to be more progressive than others. The common denominator is a bit lower. You can't always get a consensus on that. But that is the key issue that you point out, that how they negotiate these political issues is important. And they're being very skillful, as I see, in dealing with that.
Charles, I think that I'm going to open it up now and invite Dr. Barrow, Mira, and Nima to also expand this conversation further. It's unfortunate, just as we speak, there are people outside my window that are cutting down a tree. So anyway, so can we have your thoughts on all of this? And Ashwini, can you have everyone on the screen, the panelists on the screen together? That's awesome.
Yes.
Should I go, Manisha?
Yeah, go ahead, Nima.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much, Charles. That was really a very inspiring talk, and I really it was very, very informative, because a lot of these things that the Rainforest Initiative has been doing, I wasn't aware of. So definitely something that I would like to engage more, even both personally, but also for work. I do have a few questions, but before I get to the questions, I was wondering if you could share with us a few success stories coming from the ground, where some of these faith-based religions have actually, or maybe this collective that you're working with has actually helped a local people or indigenous people's movement and has been able to save a tropical forest, or has been able to fight against a very strong extractive industry or a dam from coming or oil drill coming, that would be really useful for us, because so far whatever you described was more at advocacy and legal, at the legal level. My second, if you could also help us understand if there were other indigenous communities or countries or organizations who would want to be associated with the work that you all are doing, how can they go about doing that? So first, I would like you to please expand on this, and then I did have a couple of questions to ask you after that. Thank you.
Great, well, thank you. And the initiative is really new, so I can't claim that we've stopped deforestation in the world and so on. So we're, it's beginning. And it's taken some time to launch these initiatives. So I'm not, in a position to claim too many success stories yet. It's a beginning. We're really at the beginning of the initiative. But I think the most encouraging work that I'm seeing so far is happening in Colombia and Peru. Brazil has been more difficult. We were just launching it at the time that Bolsonaro was elected, and there was kind of a state of terror actually was created there, and such a repression of the NGOs, indigenous peoples, and so on, that there wasn't, that we weren't able to really get off the ground until just in the last few months. And in that case, so there's no success yet to point to in Brazil. And it's really a particularly tragic situation in Brazil, because the Global Forest Watch report that just came out a few months ago, showing what's happening in the last year in terms of deforestation, showed that Brazil comprises a third of all the deforestation has happened in Brazil in the last year, and it's increasing even more. The attacks on indigenous peoples, the withdrawal of their rights, and so on. It's just a heinous, terrible situation, and it's particularly unfortunate because Brazil was a success story between 2004 and 2012. They managed to decrease their deforestation rate by 80%, and partly by recognizing indigenous people's rights, protecting, creating protected areas, and enforcing regulations and so on. So, and they did that while increasing food production, showing that you don't have to lose forests, you don't have to destroy forests in order to increase food production. So Brazil, I would have to say, we have not had a measurable impact that I've seen yet. One of the encouraging things in Brazil is that we've connected with evangelical leaders who have joined the movement and agreed to participate. That's hard for them. They're the ones who put Bolsonaro in power, but they also, as I mentioned earlier, are the ones who recognize that we have no right to destroy God's creation, and that's a stronger commitment to them than whatever had them vote for Bolsonaro. So we've attracted the interest of the evangelicals. They're participating with us. They're getting involved. They're starting to lead the movement, and they're doing a number of things, reaching out to some indigenous groups. We have the indigenous leaders, Sonia Guajajara, who is one of the major indigenous leaders, is on the board in that country and leading the operation, so on. So in Brazil, the most important country of all, I'd have to say we have not yet impacted that. I think we have a chance at it, but we can't claim any success there. In Colombia, there are some 25 local initiatives, and I haven't been able to go back there since this year due to the COVID thing, so I can't report on the details, but I'm hearing from the team that that they're having some success in influencing the land use policies in these regions of high deforestation, and there's quite a bit of accomplishment there, but I don't have the details to really fully share, but it's extremely encouraging what they're telling us about how the local groups are beginning to influence local politics, local policy, local land use practices, including indigenous rights in those communities. Similarly, in Peru, and actually in Colombia, also I mentioned that in terms of policy, the National Development Strategy was agreed upon last year, and they were able to embed certain commitments in there. But I understand what you're saying is that commitments and action are different, and yet you kind of often don't get to action until you have commitment. So it's a first step. In Democratic Republic of Congo, that's also fairly recent. The focus right now that's most encouraging is that there is an interfaith group that has tremendous power. They basically oversee the elections. They referee the elections. They manage the healthcare of the country. They have huge impact on the education. They have taken on the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative and they're running with it in their own right. And just in these weeks now, as I mentioned, some very innovative and surprising legislation around empowering Indigenous peoples is being discussed by the Parliament. Now COVID has interrupted a lot of the work there, but they're still moving that forward. And the religious groups have come in and supported Indigenous peoples, which has never happened before. And when they do that, the government listens. We don't have local programs in DRC yet. Once the COVID passes, we'll be able to get those local meetings to happen. Indonesia, in particular, the Muslim leaders have been active in some of the provinces with certain fatwas have been developed. Again, it's more of a policy level, but it's been important and impactful in terms of getting local attention on stopping local deforestation. So there's a number of things happening, but I would like to come back to you in coming months and life. I can't claim that we've really solved the problem, but we see huge potential so far in each of these countries. And
sorry, Nima and Charles, just may I interrupt just for 1 second, because we have another guest here with us, Edwin Birnbaum, who's joining in from Berkeley, and he's going to speak next Sunday. And I quickly want to introduce him because there's a lot of smoke there because of the wildfires, and so he has to leave soon. Hi, Ed. Can you just turn your screen down a bit so we might see your face?
Oh, yes.
Hey, so glad to see you. This is
nice to see you. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm enjoying it.
Yes.
Great to see you, Edwin. Great.
Good to see you as well. Great work.
I went to Berkeley too.
Briefly say that we're having Edwin with us next Sunday, and he's going to be speaking about his subject, which is sacred mountains, and in particular on the Badrinath and Mount Kailash, and the efforts that were made to introduce the World Heritage Site status to them, and the challenges that they face. So it's going to be a very interesting discussion next Sunday, also in continuation of what we've started today. So hope you stay safe, Ed, with all the—
Oh, I'm safe. It's just that it's very hot inside because of the poor air quality. We have to keep the windows closed. And where I live in California, there's no air conditioning. So we normally don't get temperatures like this. So it's gotten rather hot.
Great. Glad you dropped by.
Good. Well, thank you.
Yeah, super.
And I look forward to next week.
Wonderful.
Good. And as I say, congratulations on your work, and it's very valuable work to be doing what you're doing with the rainforests. And I would also, I have a friend who was very keen not only on rainforests, but also cloud forests. So I hope you expand your scope to cloud forests as well.
Oh, yes. I've been in some cloud forests in Costa Rica before.
Yeah.
Well, great.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. And see you next week.
Can we?
Great. And Nima, your other point was about how to get involved. Would you say that again about how to get involved in it? Or
Yeah, because you mentioned that you're currently working in 5 countries. So if there were organizations, networks, or indigenous people's movements from other countries who wanted to engage with the initiative, how would they go about doing it?
Yeah, we had a board meeting a few weeks ago about this topic of the future, and this has been a pilot phase of the program, and so we've been asking the question. The point of the pilot phase was to see, is it worth pursuing this? Let's see if there's interest. I think the conclusion is that it's worth pursuing, that there's enough interest and commitment, and now we can start to, I think, produce the kinds of results that you were pointing to, Nima, that need to be done. But for the next year or two, I think we'll stay focused in terms of a programmatic focus on these 5 countries. What I do intend to have, though, is to be able to make the methodology, the resources, the materials, the approach available to other countries so that interested interfaith groups could basically pick up the basic approach and roll it out. We're documenting what we're doing and how we're doing it in all these countries so that there's a body of knowledge that other countries, the other 190 countries in the world, could pick this up. And so at this point, we don't have a way to directly support activities in other countries, but indirectly we're ready to support them and coach them and help them launch things in their own right. We may be in a position in the next year or so to expand countries. We'll need to get, right now the government of Norway is the primary supporter of this. Government of Germany and the UK are also very committed to this issue, and we're in discussions with them about getting involved. If we would get some additional resources, we could expand to these other countries. In the meantime, what we can offer is our experience and information. In terms of results also, I mentioned the importance of the connection between religious leaders and indigenous leaders, and I think when all is said and done, that might be the contribution this initiative makes. That's what I'm seeing in each of these 5 countries, a kind of, in these launching events, the UN were able to convene oftentimes groups that won't meet outside of an organized convening. And in each of these countries, when we brought the religious leaders, indigenous leaders together, oftentimes it was maybe the first time they've met each other. And there's been years, even 500 years of bad will and problems. And we've just seen some dramatic openings happening in each of these countries where in Colombia, for example, and one of the activists, indigenous leaders who has been leading for decades and decades, said that he never thought in his lifetime he would see this kind of result, that he thought that hunger would be ended before they would be able to get this kind of reconciliation, this kind of healing. And that's what's most encouraging to me, is that in each of these countries, we're creating a forum where the differences can be sorted out and some kind of healing and possibly reconciliation can happen. That's certainly our intention.
Can I ask a question, Manisha? Do we have time?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we have time. Go ahead. And we can, others can also ask, and we can come back to this. It can be as informal as we need.
Yes. Okay. So thank you so much. That was really useful. I had a question because I was thinking, particularly in the context of 3 points that I was going to mention now. What has been your experience in these 5 countries? One, the fact that, like you mentioned about yourself and your father's reaction to religion, more and more youth are now disillusioned with religion, even in very traditional societies, even within indigenous people's movements. People feel that youth are not really engaging either spiritually or with religious institutions in particular. And we notice this very much in many of the states where religion is playing a role in conservation, but young do not want to engage with religion anymore, particularly institutionalized religion. The second is the fact that more and more in countries like India and many others across the globe, there is there's this distrust of institutionalized religion because of the political power that they have and the kind of divisive political role that they have been playing in many of the countries. So, and that then goes on also in many of the areas where we are engaged with local communities or Adivasi communities struggles to protect their territories and lands from extractive industry. The institutionalized religions have not really come to support them. But in addition to that, there is a kind of distrust between these indigenous communities and the dominant religion, because there is also this whole war of ideologies, because very often many of these religions would not recognize Adivasi communities or indigenous peoples for their spiritual traditions. And there would be an imposition and dominance of the dominant religion. So either recognizing an Adivasi to be a Hindu or to be a Christian or to be a Muslim or whatever, but not recognizing that they have their own spiritual religious traditions. So this also makes these religions very, this relationship very uncomfortable between these indigenous people and the institutionalized religions. So how has this played out in your work in these different countries? I'm very curious to know.
Yes, and so almost 2 points. With regard to the youth, yes, it seems clear that the youth are not really flocking to these institutionalized religions, but I'm seeing that in each of the religions in the various countries that there often is a fairly dynamic youth movement, and we do intend to tap into that. We don't know how we're going to do that exactly, but we know that in each of the countries that to maximize the impact that we need to appeal to the youth. It's something that each of the leaders in each of our country are thinking about, and in our overall global strategy, we know we need to have a breakthrough in terms of engaging the youth. We're hearing from some of the interfaith groups. Some of the Protestant groups have come to us and said, you know, the youth in our churches are insisting on action on climate, that we can't get their attention, we can't get their trust, we can't win their confidence without taking action, and therefore we're going to get involved with the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative. So it's been interesting that we're seeing that the youth activists in some of these major traditional institutionalized religions are feeling the heat from their youth, and they're responding in various ways. And one way is that they're coming to us and saying they want to participate with us. And that relates to your second point about the distrust of these religious institutions, that we're seeing that some of them are gaining trust, gaining some confidence by being active, by getting involved with the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative and other things. That's one of the things to make them more trustworthy, more attractive to their constituencies. And with regard to the indigenous peoples, what you mentioned with the Adivasi and so on, I'm seeing playing out in the other countries as well. I think in each country, no matter what the institutional religion, there's often a fear of indigenous spirituality and indigenous faiths, that it's even the case in some of the evangelicals in the Amazon consider that spirituality the devil, the work of the devil, and it's actually terrifying to them. And it's really interesting that we're dealing with that, is to try to bring these evangelicals in and bring the indigenous peoples in and be able to have them be able to have some discourse. It's pretty clear to me that there's certain evangelical groups that are just too far out to be able to get on this wavelength fully. That I think that they have such a strong belief that the indigenous spirituality is a threat to their faith in their work, but we're seeing more and more willing to be a little bit more open-minded. But it's a serious issue that we can't, I think, hope to crack in the short term. But we're seeing some evidence that there's an opening up to that. But it's going to be constant building of trust. In Indonesia, the whole program blew up for some months over this issue, where the indigenous leaders of Amman, which is the representing some 20 million indigenous peoples in Indonesia, were just outraged by some of the political positions taken by the religious leaders, and said, we'll have none of it. And so it really took something to kind of heal that, to open up channels. And now Amman is fully on the advisory council, fully leading, fully respected, and actually really on the inside. So a lot of our work is along those lines of trying to heal broken relationships and open up channels of communication and ultimately healing, exactly along the lines of what you're talking about. So yes, we're dealing with the same issues that you're referring to in India, but as I say, I'm seeing some progress in each of these countries.
It's really nice that you use the word healing, Charles, because that's really it, right, Nima? Is that
Yes.
we need to come together and heal the distrust and reconnect with each other so that we can protect nature. May I open it up also to Meera and Ed now? Share, Meera.
Yeah, thank you, Manisha. Thank you, Charles. That was very informative. And I didn't know that World Council was actually, we were going to have a meeting in Brazil this year on Indigenous environmentalism. And I was, Dr. Edmund and I was in Kenya last year in August, participating in an interfaith meet in the Hilton of all the places. But that was about, and I felt so at home in Kenya. So it was like, almost like, I feel at home anywhere because of connection to nature, I think. So I would like to just add a little bit to the comments that Nima made, because I have been practicing in the faith, and I've been working on, I'm an Indian philosopher, so I work a lot on Indian religions and Hinduism. And what I noticed by and by is that the faith of Hinduism is not a monolithic religion. It's already interfaith. And so when I started looking for strands of faith, I think one of the things that happens is I've been dealing with college youngsters. I've been teaching the master's level for 8 years. So I very well know the kind of socio-political backgrounds that they come from. And my college students are very vocal. Yesterday, somebody asked me a strange question like, isn't critical thinking elitist? And that question I've never been asked about critical thinking being elitist. And then we went on to talk about how education itself is elitist and it is a privilege and stuff like that. But sometimes I think what is also happening is there's this, what I really find on the ground, because my husband is an activist and we both are environmental activists. Probably we go out and stop that tree cutting and talk to government and do these negotiations and stuff. But what I also realize is the disillusionment of youngsters, particularly is problematic when they are in the field working with the people, because the common person on the road is religious. He's not spiritual in that sense. He's not gone on to this. And advocates of religion are not just there is no advocate of religion in the Hindu faith. There is no church. There's no overall authority. There are all these little leaders and gurus and Swamijis and temple trusts and very localized, so many different, so it's very hard to catch hold of a Hindu and shake him up. You can catch hold of Ravi Shankar and talk to him, catch hold of the Osho ashram. So I feel a lot of initiative was, I was struggling with this. Then I got in touch, and what I'm right now doing is dialogue. And one of the problems that people, the Hindu, the mainstream faith, do not listen to the conservationists and the activists is because they have an attitude of disrespect for the religion and the religious people. I have seen people from the Center for Secularism go down and talk down to the people who are celebrating Ganesha festival. And that's not going to open any dialogues. And I think that is where Buddha taught us a way of, you know, going down to the level of the person you're teaching to, not actually going down, going with him in the same plane and talking. So I actually gave lectures on to a bunch of, it's very strange, to a bunch of Marxist, leftist youngsters on Hinduism. So I think that is something like telling them that it's human. And if you want to get good work done, you talk, you dialogue. And dialogue is not about, dialogue is first about finding the other person's viewpoint and being with them. And I think that is one of the initiatives as faith people that we can do. The second thing I want to share is that academics who have been working on philosophy, environmental philosophy, there are a whole bunch of us across nations and across countries. And we've been too much in our ivory shells, though we've been writing books and stuff. So we've actually, very interestingly, I'm finding, I think this is nature calling on to us. And there's a whole lot of things that I'm actually right now in 7 groups. So that we formed a powerful consortium of environmental philosophers. And this is across from everywhere. And this consortium is going to start a website, and we are actually talking about more than human landscapes and stuff. And I'm sure a couple of them are on the rainforest. There's Patrick Curry from Australia, and there's somebody from Dr. Ghana, and there's like somebody from Arizona. So there's a huge set of people across the world, and we're planning to contact, and probably I'll put them in touch with you, Dr. Charles, so we can take it forward. Because one of the things, as educationists, we meet these youth. We are always in the colleges, we'll be talking to the future. And I think one of the places where, in India particularly, this can impact is in the spaces of colleges and stuff. And over the past few years, I've seen this outburst of environmental support that has come, which used to happen a little while ago. It had died down. And I think it's going to happen again. And so I think it is not so hopeless. And so I think it will work through. I think what we need is what we also suggested is the local custodian theory. The local custodian is the person who's right there in the field, in the ground. And if we are able to educate local custodians, they know the lay of the land, they know the local, I think Kalpavruksha also works through local custodians. And I think that kind of initiatives which could spread, and if they were connected to a resource like that of the Rainforest Network and Interfaith Networks, I think that resource, it is wonderful having that. And I would think that one of the things that Coexist could do is to have this translated into regional languages, so that it's accessible in Marathi, in Kannada, and Tamil. And I think that is one of the things that we could really do, which would really help all of us. Even having a parallel site with those materials translated into the local languages. And I wanted to ask Dr. Charles, do you also modify those materials once you get feedback from the religious leaders? Because I know World Council, we just did something on LGBTQ, and we came out with this whole interfaith document on inclusivity of LGBTQ people in religion. I know that we worked on that, but what kind of feedback mechanism do you have to feed into your resources?
Great, thank you so much. And on your early points there about with Hinduism being so localized, it's not like the Catholic Church where there's a pope and kind of this top-down sort of approach. It's a very different situation with the Hindus, I'm aware. And your point about the break in communication between Hindus and practicing Hindus and conservationists, because they're feel disrespected. That's a classic story that I'm hearing and seeing around the world, and heard that a lot from of conservative Christians in the US. I was just shocked to hear them explain to me that because the environmentalists and the scientists sort of don't came up with theories of evolution and talk about birth control and so on, that based on that the scientists are not adhering to what they believe, that's why they're rejecting any action on climate change. Isn't that, I was just like blown away by, because of some historical differences of opinion, they're not going to believe the science on climate change, and the feeling of disrespect, and it comes down to that, not feeling respected, not feeling heard. So that cuts across religions and across cultures, and is something I think we need to listen to very carefully and fix that and be respectful. And with regard to this outburst of environmental action and commitment that you're seeing, I'm very encouraged to hear that. And with regard to your point about the educational materials, in fact, the first set of education materials about how forests and climate and biodiversity and so on figure into their theology, into their scriptures, that was all done by the religious leaders themselves. What's now happening is, at the national level, the local religious leaders are then adjusting it, modifying it, making it relevant to their local circumstances. And so the way we're dealing with that is we're having them do it all. So however they adjust it is okay with us, with the exception that we have the local scientists, the local indigenous leaders overseeing it, because it would be awkward and counterproductive if the revisions ended up leading to dogmatic approaches that could be not up to date, not current, not correct. So we do have local watchdogs, particularly making sure that the indigenous peoples' issues and concerns are properly reflected, as well as the scientific. So that's how we deal with it, is that they do it and they oversee it and make it useful for them. But thanks so much for your comments.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Meera, for bringing up the point of the local custodian, because, it's one thing to have a leader in a very powerful, visible position say something, but that leader may not really be connected to what's going on the ground. Whereas if you have a network of local custodians, like you said, who are actually on the ground and working with the people, and have them kind of have that network. So you're decentralizing the thing. It's not just about one, very visible celebrity religious leader saying something, but that it really comes down to the ground. I think that was one key point.
And that's why when we launched this, we didn't know that this local chapters approach was needed. But it was found to be needed for that very reason, that the local religious leaders can have more influence often than the ones at the national level. But at the national level, those are the ones who can actually get the attention of the president, the prime minister, the parliament, and be able to put these issues on an agenda that they might not ever get on otherwise. But so the dual approach of local as well as the national level we're finding is essential.
Can I chirp in here?
Yes, Ed. Go ahead.
Charles, thank you very much. Lovely to hear your dulcet sounds from a long way away. I've got a few points to make, and one has just come really from what Meera and Nima and yourself have said. How can we use this sort of approach and the concept of sacred nature to de-siloize education? I'm a geographer, I'm a scientist, I'm a padre, so that education is much broader. And in the same vein, how do we de-siloize science? Because science is also, a lot of scientists don't think that social science is a science at all, or religious sciences is a science at all. So that's one question. The second part was the second of three parts, actually. How can we use this sort of approach, using the powerful religious heads, religious leaders, and I cite Pope Francis myself many times, how do we use them so that we can better respect and recognize the sacred nature we have about us, the sacred trees, sacred groves, sacred mountains? How do we get their support to get such areas respected and recognized at a national level? And not just the national level that is the the environmental level, because sadly the environmental sector tends to be a weak sector. But at the level of the president or planning or finance or whatever it might be, because then you can start getting articulation of that respect at a local level. As an example, how many sacred groves across the world are actually respected in formal law? And the answer is sadly very, very few. So can we use this platform as a means to inform and influence the respecting and recognition of sacred nature by others, not just by me and my own sacred grove, but by other religions, other spiritual traditions, other indigenous groups, etc. But I'm really grateful that UNEP and the UN have taken this concept on board and started to put it into a practice that can have a journey of its own, because the UN has a convening power that many of us on our own, we don't. And my previous employer, I knew about that convening power and used it many times myself. So how can we use the UN convening power to bring this up to the level of other agents? Lastly, and I'll go back to Pope Francis. Pope Francis is an extraordinary individual. And some of the quotations in Laudato Si are extraordinarily powerful. But how does that reflect into the father of the parish in a country X? How does he or he start to implement such things? Thank you.
And Ed, could you say just a little bit more about the problem with the silos that you're seeing? How does that manifest? And because I think I know what you mean. And in my UN work, I see problems when experts in different fields don't communicate. They don't work together. You end up with a fractured kind of approach. But say maybe a little bit more about what's broken about silos in education and silos in science.
Well, for me, the silos in science. Now, I worked for the World Agroforestry Center for a few years, and you start to see that I'm a soil scientist, therefore soils most. I'm a tree scientist. I'm an agricultural scientist. But at the end of the day, they're all operating on the same landscape. And how do we start having that more integrated approach, that more holistic approach to land use and so forth? And in this, and the education, and in the same sense, a lot of those people will say this stuff about spirituality and conservation and trees, you can't justify it on scientific terms. Well, from my own personal viewpoint, I don't need to justify it on scientific terms, but many people want it justified. And there are examples of that. Second, in education, we tend to be educated again along silos. I do geography, history, maths, French, and God knows what. But I need to know what are the interactions across those. And certainly my sons talk about this, how they were educated in a very siloized approach and how they see the need in their real life situation to have education in business or in spirituality or whatever as part of their overall education. So that's what I mean there, is trying to, because a lot of the traditional siloized education grew out of the Industrial Revolution and has permeated the world for better or for worse.
Yeah, great, thank you. So on your first question is how can this platform or how can this work help in those issues of siloizing, and a new word. I think we've just created a new term, and not only siloize but desilize. So I think the fact that the focus is on forests, protecting, restoring forests, that allows the activists in the country to call upon whatever science they need to solve that problem. So there isn't anyone involved pushing a particular approach. What the advisory councils in each country looks at is what's driving deforestation, what are the solutions, and what can we do about it? So I think the approach that's being taken at the national level and the local level won't be won't be siloizing either the education or the science. At least that's my initial observations, is that it's mission focused. It's, we need to achieve this goal. What do we need to know about the soils? What do we need to know about the agroecology? What do we need to know about the meteorology? What do we need to know about all of it? And so I think I'm seeing the various adherents of these siloed approaches coming together in common cause. At least that's the observation so far. With regard to the sacred groves and how this platform can be used, I would want to ask a world expert on that topic, an author, a celebrated author, and a leading authority named Dr. Edmund Barrow, to help on that topic as well. But I can speculate a little bit, but not as well as you, for sure. On that, I would say that it's an interesting point, because what we could do is introduce the concept to the facilitator in each country and make them aware of the fact that there are sacred groves, there are sacred mountains, that there's a whole body of work and knowledge and experience around that, and that could help these countries achieve their goals. So I think what I can do is hear from you more about what material I can make available to the 5 countries, that they can then, when they have their strategy meetings and saying, so how can we protect forests, by simply getting behind the support that's already there for sacred groves and using that as an instrument in their strategy, that's something that we could introduce. In a similar way, the idea of sanctuary programs is catching on in the 5 countries, that indigenous peoples are under attack more now than ever in Brazil, for example, but also in Colombia and Peru. And so what religious leaders have said is that they're interested in using their physical structures and their moral authority to kind of create a sanctuary program. And in a similar way, we could probably introduce the idea of sacred groves and sacred forests more explicitly into the program. And then with regard to your third point about the fact that you can have a really enlightened leader, I would say, like Pope Francis, what do the fathers and parish leaders think about that, and how are they aligned with him? Well, as I was mentioning, that I haven't been able to travel for the past months into the local level to see how a lot of the things are evolving. So I can't speak too authoritatively about it, but from the local Catholic leaders, for example, that I've met in all the countries, actually, I think they pay attention to what Pope Francis has said, that mostly they're aligned with it. The opposition among the Catholic Church seems to come from Europe and the US and other places, not from these developing countries themselves so much. But my sense is that in most cases, that progressive voice from the higher level is beneficial and taken on board. And I'm not seeing a lot of resistance to that at the local level so far. So maybe I'll stop there on that point. But thank you very much. And let's talk more about the Sacred Grove and your work on that, because I know you've been doing amazing things for years on that topic.
Great. I think, thank you both. I think at this point, I just want to quickly acknowledge 2 other guests who I'm so happy that I've joined here, and maybe they may want to also contribute to the conversation. And then we can also open up to the audience after that. Gaurav and Santosh have questions to ask, so we'll do that in a bit. I just want to welcome Bablu Ganguly, who's here with us. He's the founder of a group called the Timbuktu Collective. He spoke some time ago on Revive and has done path-breaking work in the village that he moved to in Andhra Pradesh. I don't know, Bablu, if you're here and you can say hello. be nice to hear from you and hear your thoughts. Bablu, are you there? And while we're waiting for Bablu, I also want to welcome Hema Patankar, who's here joining us from Berkeley. Hema has been working with a group called Living Sanskrit, and she is also very, very keen on the links between spiritual traditions and nature conservation. So both Hema and Bablu, if there's something you'd like to say before we open up to the audience.
And if I could say that I welcome not any kind of comments, that you all know more about many of these topics than I do by far. So let's have this be, feel free to share and make any points rather than questions. I couldn't consider myself an authority on many of these topics, but I'm sure interested in considering all of you authorities on many of these topics.
Okay, while we're waiting for Bablu and Hema, should we open up? I think Lata wants to say something, but before that, Gaurav Limaye has been waiting for a while, and also Santosh Lalwani. So, Ashwini, if you can give them. Oh, Bablu's here. Bablu, would you like to say something? He is talking to us from a very remote location, so there may be some. Bablu, you can go ahead and speak. Okay, Gaurav, why don't you go ahead with your question in the meantime? I wonder if they're having difficulty speaking. Ashwini, can we please just
unmute from, I think you have power over there, mute and unmute. So because you're on the professional Zoom, so you have to go to that thing and enable participants to speak because you're on the professional.
Yes, we've done that already, Meera.
Yeah,
we've done that already. It's not coming through.
Not coming on. Yeah, that happens. It's like different versions of Zoom.
And Bablu actually has unmute, but perhaps his internet is not working. Just give them a few seconds because sometimes it takes time for it to come through. Yeah, Bablu, we can't hear you. For some reason, maybe you need to check your...
Gaurav, you can go ahead.
Gaurav Limaye, are you still with us? So the question that Gaurav had was, how can governments be convinced about the importance of biodiversity conservation and ecological restoration, which is what he typed into the Q&A. I think you have, many of you have already spoken about governments. Charles, do you want to say anything more in particular to this question? How can governments be convinced about the importance of biodiversity conservation and ecological restoration?
Yes, I think as I was saying earlier, what's needed is political influence, and because it's really well known what it takes to stop deforestation, and we have lots of examples of that, and it does come down to political influence, so how they can be convinced is by having influencers put pressure on them, and the many influencers in society. What I'm seeing is that religious leaders, institutional or otherwise, are often extremely influential. And to motivate governments to implement the kinds of laws and regulations, enforcement and finance that's needed to effectuate change requires a sea change in public opinion, activism, and so religious leaders. The other thing is the private sector. The private sector plays a really powerful role in a really negative way many times in these countries, especially when these extractive industries we've talked about, which are often major drivers of deforestation, and they have political influence and can lead to corruption and so on. So one way to respond to Gaurav's question is you need to neutralize the negative impacts of the private sector, the kind of the governance impacts, the corruption, the bribes, that influence needs to shine a light on that. And sometimes religious leaders can help with that, because corruption is definitely within their area of concern. So I think religious leaders can weigh in on corruption in a way that few voices can. So that would be the only point I would add is that to neutralize that negative voice of the private sector is important, and religious authorities can help with that at some of the time. But thank you for that question.
Thanks, Charles. Santosh Lalwani has posed a question. This is specifically for, I guess, India. They're saying, have you approached Jainism philosophies like ahimsa, anekantavad, jio or jinedo, and aparigraha? So is there...
It's true. I have been doing a lot of philosophical work on different traditions of philosophy, particularly Jainism and Buddhism. I have, so what I try to do is an interfaith approach when I speak about it, when I'm talking to, I get to meet a lot of religious leaders because of being a philosopher and being a professor. So they have this whole, you have the glamour of the academic world behind you, which allows you entry, sort of a neutral entry into a lot of places where you wouldn't go if you were a complete activist. So I use that to my advantage. So I teach people about metta and how to listen to each other through Buddhism. And I use whatever resources. So I figured out long ago in the environment that you just have to pull out whatever resources you can from whichever religion you can. And as long as you're talking some kind of humanity, it works. But also I have had troubles. It's not that it's very smooth. And in Jainism particularly, the trouble that I have is the extremity of the religious belief systems, because it is very easy to slip into, a dialogue. For example, this I'm going to share directly because I think this panel is broad enough to listen to this. So Jainism has this very strict non-meat eating idea, right? And inside Jainism, there's no caste system. So if you look at, if I start encouraging vegetarianism and also veganism as a way, it doesn't, when I move into a Dalit colony, their main food is non-vegetarian. When I'm talking to fishermen, their main food source is something from the ocean. So what happens is sometimes when you talk to the Jains, they're very happy with what they're already doing, and they don't need convincing about that, but they need to be convinced that their temples need not be made from marble extraction. You see that? So I think the point is not to take one religion and say this is great and this has these points, but to find entries into the religion and tell them to be self-reflexive. And I've been talking about this too. Dialogue is not about finding out what's wrong with the other person, but in the dialogue, you tend to discover yourself. So I've been emphasizing, I think WCC also does that. So I asked the Jains, how can you in your religion, so I don't take Jainism and preach it to the Buddhists or the Hindus, but I take Hinduism and preach it to the Hindus, and Jainism and preach it to the Hindus, to themselves. And I think there are some points, I like the point about common environmental causes, because things like trees and living conditions, I don't even try an anthropocentric or a biocentric approach. I go with I think as a conservationist on the field, I have realized that the point is to get the work done, preserve, stop cutting the tree. It doesn't matter what the belief system is, what the belief system can aid, but there are lots of world-denying nature denying traditions in Hinduism itself. Like everything is Maya, it's okay if we cut down trees. So I've heard that kind, but that's not the point. The point is that are you going radical? Are you talking about prana? Are you talking about, you know, some more basic foundational compassion, living conditions, making, so I just choose the ethics that suits that particular group. That's what I'm saying, it's very local. So in that sense, I have worked on Jainism, but I use Anekantavada in my own life and I talk about it everywhere because it's not perspectivism. It is actually like more like, it's also something the feminists call the standpoint theory, right? So it's there. So what I try and do is to restore the dignity of the religion and without destroying their basic cultural faith. So if I were with the Christians, Dr. Charles talked about, I'd say, okay, forget Darwin. But God has made you the custodian of your nature. He said, he gave unto you the land and told you you were the steward. So there I would emphasize on the stewardship model of what God said. And in Hindus, I will talk about the oneness of all beings. In Jainism, I'll talk about the wonder of biodiversity is a wonderful topic that I can use in Jainism because they list over 50 million beings. So the respect for all beings at the same level is available in Jainism. So I think that is where I think on the ground, in my own personal faith and my own journey, I do that. And when everything fails, I whip out a tarot card and says, you should heal in nature. And then that actually works with some of the people who are very tight and, you know, it works especially with the corporates. I've done more good work reading tarot for corporates than I've done in giving lectures on environmental philosophy. So they are astrological. So I say your company should be more taking care of nature and then nature will give you abundance. So then they actually implement that. You know, it's very funny, but a lot of corporates are not the kind of people we imagine them to be. The people in them are very, very susceptible to spirituality. So I know that it does seem like they're this huge, when we look at them as monoliths, they seem scary. But I think as people, when you talk to them as people, you know, yeah, somewhere nature is more powerful than anybody else in the world. And I feel if I've got nature behind my back, I can do a lot of work. And you do tend to get tired and you do tend to get cynical, but I think we can do stuff at our own level and we shouldn't give up. If we give up, then who will speak for nature? Yeah.
That's lovely, Meera. Thank you so much. I just want to share, you know, something that I've been thinking about for some time now, Charles, is the importance of symbolism and how religions and, you know, they use it very effectively, creating symbols. And for sometimes now I've been looking at the, even within the Hindu pantheon of deities, the idea of Bhudevi, you know, and why is it that we've had no temples to Bhudevi? And that could one actually come up with a new symbolism and design a temple for the planet Earth, you know, and bring in new symbolism into existing traditions. And so it's just a thought that keeps coming up in my mind. And, you know, and I've approached a few artists to see how they would design what this deity would look like. So just a little bit, if Charles, if you and Meera, if you can talk about this, you know, symbolism and how it influences people's thinking and then therefore their choices.
Charles, would you like to go first? Yeah.
I don't really I haven't thought about it much. I don't think I have much to say about symbolism and how it could be utilized. I haven't looked into that. I agree with you that it's powerful and influential. I think I would leave it to the religious leaders in each country to figure out how to use it. It's not something that from New York, from UN headquarters, that we could kind of stipulate or guide, but it is maybe something we could invite the leaders in each country to explore how they could utilize symbolism to advance this cause in a maximum way.
So we do have temples to Bhudevi in the south because she's a consort of Narayana, and I looked at it in the beginning because one of the first Vedic deities to be worshipped in Hinduism is Bhudevi. But the problem is with the symbol is that sometimes the symbol becomes more powerful than the symbol, what it is a symbol of. And that's a danger in India all the time, because what will happen is you will worship the Bhudevi and pour liters of milk on her head and you'll have this puja, but the actual forest you will cut down. And all of us conservationists know that is a danger. So that is where the indigenous traditions, they don't have the symbolism, but they actually have the tree itself being worshipped. They have the mountain itself being worshipped, like direct worship of nature. And I found that direct worship of nature creates a phenomenological encounter. Maybe Dr. Edmund can talk to us a little more about that encounter with the sacred, which is the natural sacred. You know, a dip in the Ganges is not equal to worshiping the Ganges in the temple. So when people encounter that nature, they have a different kind of idea towards it. The kind of symbolism that works is like the Tulsi plant, right? A sacred symbol, but it's not a Tulsi plant which is represented in a statue. You can't worship a picture of a Tulsi plant. You have to worship the actual Tulsi plant. So that the Tulsi plant is a very interesting symbol. It's a signifier, but it is not removed from its materiality, whereas Bhudevi gets removed from a materiality. What they do in history is they actually, first it's the earth. They worship the earth. They draw the Rangoli patterns on the earth. That is the earth worship that we do. Sorry for stepping on you, earth. We are drawing this pattern and we are beautifying you to apologize for that. And then what they do is they make her into a goddess, get her married to a bigger god, Narayana. And so she gets divorced from her body. So then they say, oh, the goddess is there in the heavens, but this is just her manifestation. So it's a kind of a replacement history of Hinduism. So I think what we need to look at is also what Sahapedia is doing, like look at anthropomorphic gods, Ganesha, Hanuman. They're already embedded in nature, and perhaps kind of bringing out their nature dependency would, there are lots of these local deities. There are hundreds of Himalayan deities who are very, very ecologically friendly. There's a pastoral deity called Eri. There's a deity of justice called Golu. There are all these Ammans, all these mother goddesses who are very nature. That Batama festival is a celebration of biodiversity where the women collect flowers and decorate pots. So there are a lot of these women's deities and women's indigenous deities. I think a lot of work is being done in them, and you'll soon have a huge book of collection. I'm hoping to put together a handbook of local deities in India. It's a huge work, but we're collecting data right now. Yeah.
Wow, that's wonderful. Thank you, Meera. Thank you, all of you. Charles, is there anything else? Any closing comments, Charles, would you like to make before we need to start wrapping up? And I have a few announcements to make before people leave. But Charles, is there anything else you'd like to add to this?
Yes, but and I was wondering, as Bablu might be ready to say something. It sounds like he, although as an agnostic, he might not have a lot to say. But I wondered, do we want to invite Bablu? Such a beautiful picture of Bablu there.
Bablu, can you speak now? You know, I know you're agnostic.
He's talking now, Manisha.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, Bablu.
Well, now you can see my real face. Yeah. I quite enjoyed the explanations and the talks. But you're right, Meera, there is a lot of, in the South, we do have a lot of relationships with the earth, with nature, and unfortunately, they have become so ritualized that it does not actually do the things that they are supposed to be doing. I mean, we killed a snake, you know. So I've been in farming for so long, and I find it completely, I just cannot understand why buckets of milk is poured onto the snake idol, and prayers are conducted every month, and yet the first snake they see, they kill it. And it goes with almost everything. We have in our philosophy a lot of connection with with the earth, with nature, with the natural processes. But I just cannot understand why, as a people, we are losing that connection more and more. And our religious heads, religious leaders are not looking into that seriously. Though I do think that they have immense potential and immense power to be able to direct their people in the direction that we are talking about. I mean, what Charles was talking about and what Meera was saying. I mean, it's such a powerful position to be in. Unfortunately, it's not being done. And when people like us who have been atheists and agnostics for a long time, you know, I set up a Bhudevi temple kind of. But you know, I didn't know how to take it forward. And I could not convince any of the local religious leaders to
Did we lose him?
I think we've lost sound. Bablu, if you turn off your video, then we might be able to hear you better if there's low bandwidth.
I think he's joining again.
Charles, just and Meera also, just to introduce Bablu to you. Bablu is the founder of a group called the Timbuktu Collective that works in a district in Andhra Pradesh. He moved there from Bombay 40 years ago, and we had a fantastic session with him. Are you back now, Bablu?
Yeah, I'm back.
Yeah,
I mean, nothing more to say except that I think it's great that you organized this, and it was great listening to you all.
But Bablu, what was your experience with that Bhudevi temple that you were about to tell us?
I myself didn't know how to take it forward, and the local religious leaders just were.
Oops. Okay, we've lost him again. Meera, Charles, do you have something to say? Because Bablu, you know, Bablu's the example of someone who works on the ground, right? And he has restored this amazing landscape. He has set up so many cooperatives for the people on the ground. He's turned the entire economy of that district around. And so now this is his experience as a conservationist when trying to dialogue with religious groups. So what kind of advice or what kind of thoughts would you have about that?
Well, great. Well, thank you. It was great to hear from Bablu, and I agree with his point that there's immense potential and power to direct those people, their people, in the direction that we're talking about, and that's that's the experiment that we're engaged in, endeavoring in, is to how to leverage that influence and leverage that power. It sounds like we have a lot to learn from a number of you in terms of how this is faith and conservation is playing out on the ground. So I'm really happy to have had this exchange and to be introduced to these new experiences, and I'm really grateful to all of you. Maybe my last point would be just I've alluded to kind of the role of Indigenous peoples in conservation, protecting forests. I wanted to just emphasize that in our experience, really one of the most proven ways, most effective ways to protect forests is by rapidly scaling up granting Indigenous peoples legal title to their traditional land. I don't know if this experience applies as much in India, maybe, but certainly in the Amazon and Indonesia and in Congo, the studies have shown that when Indigenous peoples' land rights are legally recognized and protected by governments, that the deforestation rates, the carbon dioxide emissions are significantly lower. So that's a real focus for us. And that right now with this COVID, it's a particularly difficult time, and we're looking to see how we can help, because governments have withdrawn any protection that they've ever provided in many of these places, and they're facing serious threats to defend their forests from incursions by mining, logging, oil, poaching, agribusiness, and so on. So I just wanted to say that for us, given the cultural and spiritual connections to forests, the traditional knowledge and so on, and the fact that the remaining forests are largely within their ancestral lands, that Indigenous peoples are really an essential partner to any efforts to protect rainforests. And I think I hadn't quite emphasized that enough. I wanted to make sure to get that across. But thank you so much for this opportunity, and it's great to be worlds apart, late night here, morning there. But thank you, Manisha, and thank you, Neera, and thank you, Nina, and thank you, Ed, for participating with me in this way. What an honor and a privilege it's been.
Thank you, Manisha, and this is a wonderful opportunity for me to also connect up with various people. You're free to share my email ID with those who ask for it. It's just my name @gmail.com. So I'm willing to contribute whatever way I can, and also learn a little more from people on the ground. One of my students has, I think 2 or 3 of my students have been to Timbuktu, and when they wrote that they're in Timbuktu, I was like, where's that? And I found out about Bablu's work. We have equivalent communities in Bangalore, near Bangalore, called Navdarshanam, where they've been doing agroecology and eco-friendly lives. And then there's also Bhumi College, where a professor called Siddharth has set up this whole initiative. We also have started, for those of you who are very upset with the kind of dark religion that is being propagated in India right now, a monolithic kind of Hinduism, an initiative called Hindus for Human Rights from US, which was set up for restoring the faith back in faith, has now started a Indian edition which says Hindu Voices for Peace. So I think the problem is also that sometimes what happens is in India, you have social, you have political, you have economic, and you have conservation. And sometimes even in my own head, these different silos are fighting. And I think what Dr. Edmund Burrows said is about the sacred can dissolve these silos. And I found more open people inside my yoga class than I have in any of my classrooms. And I think practices are, in fact, that is one of the ways I'm thinking that I will penetrate the nature thing through the yoga classes, because the community of yoga teachers is very spiritual, very diverse across religions. And so if yoga people start talking about nature, and we always do tree pose and stuff like that, I think there's a way to reach people in a very easy way. Right?
Wonderful. Nima and Ed, any last comments? And then I'll just quickly go through the announcement. It's been a long but very enlightening session. Nima, Ed, would you like to say something?
Oh, sorry. Go on, Ed. I can.
Okay. I'll just say a couple of words. I think it's really great that you are hosting these sorts of discussions, because it really does bring diverse groups together along a common cause. And for me, we all possess an innate spirituality, whoever we are, wherever we come from. And that spirituality can often be expressed in terms of, for me, sacred nature. And sacred nature can be trees, can be insects, can be mountains, can be rivers, doesn't matter. It's a matter that we are respecting nature as sacred. And the more we can do that and persuade others it is important, the better. And as an example, I was wondering, not a question to answer now, how do we start influencing big, bad industry? the extractives, the agribusinesses, the mining companies, the soya bean people in the Amazon? Are there champions in there for the causes we're interested in? And I'm sure in fact, I know there are. And how can we start working with them to get change from within big industry? But to thank you very much, Charles, for lovely words from across time and space. And thank you very much, everybody else, and especially to Manisha for organizing these Revive webinars.
You're most welcome, Ed. Nima, would you like to say something?
Nothing much. It's already very late for Charles, so I think we should not prolong, but I just wanted to say thank you very much to you, Manisha, for bringing all the people. I really loved to be in this panel with Meera, Ed, and Charles, and you, and also to hear Bablu at the end of it. That was really nice. Just to quickly add that, yes, I mean, even today, despite all the destruction that is happening in the country, in India, at least at the forefront of fighting against environmental and nature destruction, our communities who are closely associated with their landscapes, territories, because of their faith and their spiritual associations, like from the Northeast to Rajasthan to Odisha, wherever we hear of these communities. And I think we also personally learn a lot from that. The reason why they are associated is because of their worldview. And if we can begin to influence the worldviews generally, learning from them, that would be one of the ways of being able to connect with our environment and nature better. So thank you very much. I mean, I really, really enjoyed listening to Charles today. Thanks.
Great. So with that, thank you to also all the participants, the few who are still left with us. I think we're also passionate about this. We could keep talking. I just want to, before we sign off, I just want to introduce the next topic, which is very related to what Ed said. Ashwini, if we can have the visual. Edwin Birnbaum, who was with us earlier, is going to be talking to us about sacred mountains, and specifically about the Badrinath and Mount Kailash. And some of you may know that both these mountains are very sacred, considered very sacred to the Hindu community. However, that has also meant that the footprint or the human impact on these is much more, because a lot of people go there on pilgrimage. And so therefore, that balance between the sacred belief and its conservation requirements. So Ed has been part of a group that was trying to get World Heritage status for both of these. And that's what he's going to be sharing with us next Sunday, which it will be evening time for us in India. But I do hope that some of you can join us again on that. And I think the last visual is again to invite you to visit our website to see what eCoexist does, and also to get to know more about the Revive series. If any of you have recommendations for speakers, please do write into us. We've been doing all this for free. There have been many people making this happen, but we do welcome contributions. So if you can offer something, do again connect with us and we'll tell you how that's possible. But we are hoping to continue. We have some I'm very honored that people like Satish Kumar from Schumacher will be joining us in October, as well as Kartikeya Sarabhai from Ahmedabad will be speaking on the national education policy from an environmental education perspective. So I'm just so honored, because I kind of feel like I sit at home and every Sunday I have a master class with all these masters all around the world. And I feel really grateful that you have agreed to come, Charles. And I do hope that we can all, stay connected at a very deep level. So with that,